Chapter 1. Throughout many realms comprised of mass, stars, and boundless energies existed many entities. These entities were of immeasurable differences and customs that took many forms depending on their environments. On one such planet, many different species resided. Of those species in this domain, they used a source of power composed of many forms without limit. This was known as magic. In these domain, creatures that used this magic was of both of heavenly and peaceful disposition as well as demonic and ravenous. As such, an eternal struggle between the bodies of entities that developed their own customs took place. In one such axis was a domain known as the underworld, home to many creatures of the dark domain. This was just one of the many planes of reality that sat upon the axis of the universe. This underworld was a haven for creatures that practiced dark and forbidden magic. While many took on the appearances of beasts from fairy tales, the most dangerous were the ones who hid in plain sight. These demons, warlocks, and other beasts were nearly indistinguishable from the demons they hunted. In one of the recesses of the cave-like dimension was a castle that existed in its own dimension. Looking out a window, a single figure sat as he gazed upon a single mirror-like object that floated out of arm's reach, showing visions of the surface world above. Most of his features were hidden by the black cloak that shrouded his room. Another figure approached him, wearing the same cloak as outfit with only bits of raven black hair dangling out from the side. Despite his otherwise youthful features, there were distinct marks on his face that made him look older than most would assume. The third sister is on her way. Should I continue surveillance? The speaker's voice was detached, distant, void of any emotion or care. No, I'll handle this myself. The second voice answered, self-assured and eager. In another part of the city, a young woman with short blonde hair walked through her apartment carrying a tray of food and water for her cat. As she walked into her kitchen, thunder was heard, accompanying the sound of rain outside the apartment. Come on, baby, she called softly as she set the tray down. Almost immediately the cat meowed and ran to the food. Good girl, she finished. She pets her cat and slowly stood up, careful not to step on her long dark blue dress. She walked off into an adjoining room holding a silver goblet in her hands. She knelt before the altar set up in the room and placed the goblet in the middle, amidst the candles and spices. With just a touch of her finger, she lit the candles before her. Outside her apartment, a figure wearing a long black cloak could be seen climbing down a ladder. The heavy rain no doubt muffled the sounds of his approach. Her concentration unbroken, she began to chant. Ancient One of the Earth, so deep Master of Moon and Sun, I shield you in my Wiccan way. Here is my circle round, asking you to protect this space, and offer your sun force down. The dark figure entered the house through the kitchen, effectively scaring the cat out of the room. It approached her quietly as she continued her chant. Just as she finished the chant, she spun around in a panic. She sighed in relief, recognizing the intruder. What are you doing here? She asked, a slight smile appearing on her face. In response, the intruder pulled out a knife and plunged it into her stomach. She let out a short scream before falling, lifeless, to the ground. At that moment in another part of San Francisco, California sat a manor that stood long and proud for over a century. A figure crept up 1329 Prescott Street, waiting and watching for the last light in the manor to go out before he made his journey. Phasing through the door, he kept silent and vigilant as he silently crept about. He crept up the stairs, coming to a hallway. Walking past portraits, he stopped in front of a door. He turned the knob slowly and entered the room. He crept over to a woman who was sleeping in her bed. This woman had dark brown hair of moderate length with bangs, sleeping peacefully. Taking a knife out of his pocket, he raised it above her chest and was about to plunge it in, when he heard, "Embrace death." He turned around, only to come face to face with another unknown man whose features were shrouded by a black cloak, with the exception of his eyes. They were crimson slits that held the very promise of death. Before the mysterious man could retaliate, the figure pulled out his own weapon of choice, a kunai, and plunged it into his heart. The man cried out as he disappeared in a brilliant flash of fire. The woman woke up, startled, moving into a sitting position in her bed and looking around. She was a bit drowsy, to say the least. The woman got up, slipping on her slippers and putting on her robe. She moved to her door and noticed it was ajar slightly. I could have sworn I closed this door, she thought to herself. She opened the door slightly, poking her head out. She noticed no one was in the hall and, after a minute or two, dismissed what she heard as just her imagination. She returned to her bed, pulled the covers up to her neck, and drifted off to sleep. A few moments later, the figure in black stepped out of the shadows. He moved over to the woman's bedside and softly brushed her cheek with his finger. "Pleasant dreams, Prue," the figure whispered as he faded away. Some hours had passed and a storm soon set upon the city of San Francisco. A woman with dark brown hair of moderate length with bangs and conservative clothing walked through the front door of a lavish manor. Once inside, she put away the umbrella she was using to keep herself dry when she took notice of another woman with dark brown hair, nearly indistinguishable from black, standing on the ladder, working on the chandelier in the next room. "Prue," the woman said, putting up her raincoat and umbrella. "In here, Piper, I'm working on the chandelier." The woman, now identified as Prue, replied. "Sorry I'm late," Piper responded, finally gathering enough of her courage to face her sister. "Well, what else is new?" Despite the tone, there was hostility in the woman's voice. No, it was more along the lines of annoyance. "Piper, I would have been there myself to meet the electrician, but you know I can't leave the museum until 6. With her sister unable to make it back in time, her errands holding her up, the older sister had to hasten to meet the electrician, who had come and gone, leaving the sisters with a broken chandelier. It was evident by Prue's tone that she didn't have a good day today. "I guess I just didn't realize how long I was in Chinatown." "Has Jeremy called?" Piper asked as she took a bag and placed it on the dining room table. Piper smiled slightly at the thought of her fiancé. Prue couldn't help but return her little sister's hopeful smile. "No, but he had some roses and a package delivered." She pointed toward the dining room and began leading the way to where she'd placed them. "For me?" Piper asked excitedly, running after her older sister to the table in the dining room where they were laying. "What were you doing in Chinatown? I thought that you had an interview in a restaurant in North Beach." Prue asked, her eyes set on the package Piper was opening. "I did, but I went to Yonglei Market after my interview to get the ingredients for my audition recipe tomorrow," Piper explained as she continued to fumble with the stubborn material that refuses to tear and give her access to the object inside. Prue rolled her green eyes and took the package from Piper, opening it with little effort. "So that Wolfgang Puck knockoff didn't hire you, then?" she asked, handing the opened box back to Piper, who was giving her a disconcerted look. "No, but this may just get me the job," Piper responded as she held up a wine bottle, the contents of the mysterious package at last revealed. "Jeremy sent you port?" Prue finally asked, taking the bottle from Piper to read the label. "It's the ultimate ingredient for my recipe," Piper said with a grin. "What a nice boyfriend," Prue responded, which despite her happiness for her sister she was at the same time a bit jealous. She spotted the spirit board. "I don't believe it. Tell me that's not our old spirit board." She picked up the spirit board and examined it. She'd thought they'd lost those years ago. "Yeah, I found it in the basement when I was looking for the circuit tester," Prue explained, smiling at her sister's enthusiasm, as well as the fond memories that the spirit board helped resurface. Piper then began reading the inscription on the back. "To my 3 beautiful girls, may this give you the light to find the shadows. The power of 3 will set you free. Love, Mom." The spirit board was one of the few things all 3 sisters could share and remain civil with for even a short amount of time. "We never did figure out what this inscription meant," she said, putting the board down. "Well, we should send it to Phoebe. She's so in the dark, maybe a little light will help," Prue suggested sarcastically as she turned and left the room. "You're always so hard on her," Piper said, taking the bag toward the kitchen. "Piper, she has no vision, no sense of the future," Prue insisted, turning around to stare at Piper as if she couldn't believe Piper still stuck up for Phoebe after everything that had happened. "I really think Phoebe's coming around." Piper tried to persuade Prue, once again finding herself playing mediator in spite of the fact that the other sister wasn't there, but just ended up looking down at her hands, unable to match Prue's gaze. Well, as long as she doesn't come around here, I guess that's good news. Obviously there was some sort of animosity between the two sisters over an unspoken incident in the past. With that, Prue disappeared into an adjoining room. The creaking of the stairs followed Prue's ascent up the stairs, most likely to finally change out of her work dress. Prue started making her way to the ladder as the phone began to ring. Piper answered it. "Hello, Jeremy?" she asked, only taking a moment to recognize the tone, and then asked, "How are you? Where are you?" Police Detective Andrew Trudeau was driving to the location of the latest murder. He had just received a call from his partner, Daryl Morris, who had told him another woman had been stabbed. This was the fourth one within a short time frame, and the police were no closer to finding out the identity of the murder. Andy pulled into the parking lot of the apartments that the victim had lived in. He quickly shut off his car and stepped into the heavy rain. As he traversed around the police, paramedics, and bystanders, he pulled out his police mark and flashed it to the officer, prohibiting the curious bystanders from entering. Morris was waiting for him at the door of the apartment. The woman in question was in her mid-20s and lived alone. Detectives Morris and Trudeau shuffled through the crowd of people as the latter informed his partner about a lead one that didn't go anywhere. He finally answered, glancing at his watch in frustration. Every minute this person wasn't caught, another woman could end up dead. That woman up there, I bet she was killed with an athame. Andy guessed. An athame was a Wiccan tool used for many years. Lately, a lot of murders had been connected to the occult. Wrong. Double-edged steel knife, Morris replied, turning to face Andy with a look of triumph. Andy just grinned. Right. That's an athame, he countered. It's a ceremonial tool. Witches use them to direct energy, he explained, looking around to see if anyone was listening to them. He seems too invested that these women were witches. That woman didn't direct Jack. She was stabbed, plain and simple. Daryl insisted, refusing to give in to his partner's logic. After determining that no one was paying them any attention, Andy lowered his voice so as not to be heard, just in case. Was she found near an altar? He asked. Yes, Daryl replied shortly. Were there carvings on that altar? Andy pressed, smiling as he realized Daryl was trapped. Daryl rolled his eyes as he realized that what Andy was implying almost made sense. Look, just do me a favor. Don't ever follow a lead without checking with me first. You want to go to occult shops? Andy joked, grinning at his partner's reaction to being cornered. Daryl laughed at Andy's joke. Get to work, okay? He ordered, turning around and walking into the room where the victim's body was. Andy began to follow, still smiling to himself, until a voice called out behind him. Inspector Trudeau. He turned around to face a young reporter. Jeremy Burns. San Francisco Chronicles. He introduced himself and then continued, care to comment? A woman was stabbed. Plain and simple, Andy responded cryptically, echoing his partner's earlier words. He turned back to follow Morris and finally get to work. Well, that's the fourth one in 3 weeks. Jeremy countered, obviously hoping to pull more information from the inspector. Andy spun around as if to say something, but caught himself as he was unwilling to be quoted incorrectly on something this serious. Instead, he just turned his back on the reporter and followed Morris to the body of the victim. Some time had passed at the Hallowell mansion and Piper was sitting in the living room, looking out the window as the thunder roared and the rain continued to pour. Prue went back to working on the chandelier after coming from the basement, trying to get the old light to finally work. Outside, the horn of a car cut through the rain and the silence within the manor, causing Piper to jump to her feet. I don't get it. I have tried everything. There's no reason why the chandelier shouldn't be working. Piper walked up to her as Prue got off the ladder. The frustration of the older sister was evident. Being a Mr. Fix-It was not Prue's thing. You know how we've been talking about what to do with the spare room. I think you're right, we do need a roommate. Piper slowly said, trying to ease Prue into the news she had been hiding from her for quite some time. Well, we can rent the room at a reduced rate in exchange for some help around the house, Prue responded, picking up the toolbox. Phoebe's good with a wrench, Piper pointed out, another step in easing Prue into the news she was going to tell her. Phoebe lives in New York, Prue said as she headed towards the kitchen. Not anymore, she said. Prue stopped and turned around, slamming the drawer shut. What? She snapped, turning around to face Piper in disbelief. Reluctantly, Piper replied, Phoebe left New York, she's moving back in with us. Piper, Prue yelled, you have got to be kidding. The eldest Hallowell sister turned her back on Piper and walked into the conservatory, fuming. Well, I could hardly say no. I mean, it's her house too. It was willed to all of us, she said. Prue placed the toolbox down and began cleaning her hands. Well, you haven't spoken to her. Prue stopped cleaning her hands. Prue turns around with the rag still in hand. No, I haven't. Maybe you've forgotten why I'm still mad at her, she replied angrily as she twisted the rag in her hand. Piper instantly felt guilty, but she still felt she was in the right. Of course I haven't. But Phoebe's lost her job and she's in debt. She had nowhere else to go, she insisted, almost pleading with Prue to understand. How long have you known about this anyway? Just a couple of days. Piper lied casually, but upon seeing Prue's glare Piper sheepishly added, okay, maybe a week or two. Thanks for sharing, she remarked sarcastically. When does she arrive? Prue asked, her gaze on Piper, making sure she didn't lie this time. Before Piper was able to answer, the front door behind the two sisters opened and in rushed Phoebe, her brown hair damp from the rain. Surprise! I found the hide key. Her voice rang through the tense atmosphere. Phoebe, welcome home. Piper ran over and hugged the girl. Phoebe's hair was done in a bob style and, unlike the other women's more conservative clothing, the younger woman's was more reminiscent of current teenage style. It's so good to see you. Isn't it, Prue? I'm speechless, Prue replied, offering a fake smile and obviously still annoyed. A car horn beeped in the background, drawing Phoebe's attention. Oh, I forgot about the cab. Phoebe muttered as she began digging through her purse. I'll get it, Piper offered, grabbing Prue's purse from the end table and heading out the door. Piper, that's my purse, Prue called after her but didn't get a response. The door shut as Piper ran outside, leaving another tense silence in its wake. Thanks, I'll pay you back, Phoebe offered. It's okay, save your pennies. Prue gave an unconvinced nod and looked down at her one suitcase. Is that all that you brought with you? She asked. Phoebe looked down at it as well. That's all that I own. That and a bike, she answered. Again silence reigned. Look, I know that you don't want me here, Phoebe began but was interrupted by Prue. We're not selling Graham's house. Prue stepped closer as she spoke to accentuate her point. An annoyed look flashed across Phoebe's face. Is that why you think I came back? The only reason Piper and I gave up our apartment to move back here because this house has been in our family for generations. No history lesson needed, I grew up here too. So can we talk about what's really bothering you? Phoebe asked. No, I'm still furious with you, the older woman retorted, sounding all but furious as the younger woman sighed and calmly exclaimed. I never touched Roger, she reacted, going on the offensive. And I know you think otherwise because that's what the Armani wearing, Chardonnay slugging, trust funder told you, she said as Piper came back into the house. Hey, I got a great idea. Why don't I make a fabulous reunion dinner? Piper said, trying to resolve the argument. I'm not hungry, Prue said as she walked off. I ate on the bus, Phoebe also replied as she too walked off. We'll try the group hug later, Piper said to herself in a sigh. Unknown to the girls, a figure was watching the whole exchange from outside. He decided that things would need a bit of a jump start. So, channeling a bit of power, he began to move the spirit board. He watched as Piper and Phoebe sat at the table playing with the spirit board. Each of the girls had a glass of wine by them. He watched how the women talked about problems until he heard a question that he found amusing as the girls messed with the spirit board. I asked if Prue would have sex with someone other than herself this year. Piper said, putting down a glass of wine. Oh, that's disgusting. Please say yes, she said with a disgusted look that quickly changed to amusement. The board spelled as the figure smirked. What? Piper questioned as Prue came into the room. What did you guys do now? She asked, still feeling a bit hostile. I didn't do anything, Piper said in her defense. The pointer on the spirit board. It moved on its own. Prue and Piper stared at Phoebe. I am serious. It spelt A-T. Well, did you push it? Piper asked. Number. Single quote. You used to always push the pointer, Prue said, rolling her eyes. I was barely even touching it. Look. She put her fingers on the pointer and nothing happened. Prue and Piper turned and began to leave when the figure moved the pointer back to T. There. It did it again. It moved. Phoebe cried out, pointing to the object. Prue and Piper turned back around and look at the board. It's still on the letter T, she pointed out. I swear it moved, Phoebe said as the pointer moved again. Piper saw it too now. There. Look. Did you see that? Phoebe asked, wide-eyed and mystified as the figure moved the pointer again. Prue, can you come in here a sec? Piper asked as Prue came back into the room. Phoebe started to write down the letters. I think it's trying to tell us something. She held up the paper and read out loud, attic, as a loud clap of thunder echoed in the background and the power went out. While the older sisters went towards the basement to check the circuit breaker, Phoebe decided to head towards the attic. Phoebe. She should be back by now. Prue said, wondering where their missing sister was. You go first. Prue headed up the stairs, flashlight in hand, as Piper followed her. Meanwhile, Phoebe was trying to open the attic door, only to find it was locked. She gave up and turned to walk back down the stairs. When she reached the stairs, she heard a creak behind her and turned to see the attic door opening. She walked inside. A light shined on a trunk. Curious, she walked over to it. She opened it and found a heavy-looking book inside. She picked the book up and blew most of the dust off so she could open it. The Book of Shadows. She turned the page and started to read aloud. Hear now the words of the witches, the secrets we hid in the night, the oldest of gods are invoked here, the great work of magic is sought. In this night and in this hour, I'll call upon the ancient power, bring your powers to we sisters three, we want the power, give us the power. Unnoticed by the sisters, the old chandelier in the foyer lit up, sending blue and white lights through the house. The picture on the mantel was taken several years earlier began to change. Once, the picture was of the three girls, with Prue and Phoebe on the very edges, obviously wanting to be as far apart as possible, with Piper was almost in the background. Now, though, Piper was brought down to a lower step as Prue and Phoebe were brought in and all three sisters looked closer than they had before. When Phoebe had finished chanting, Prue and Piper entered the attic. What are you doing? Prue asked. Reading an incantation. It was in this Book of Shadows. I found it in that trunk. Phoebe said, gesturing to the trunk over by the wall. Let me see that, Prue ordered, taking the large book from Phoebe and flipping through it. How'd you get in here? Prue asked as she continued looking through the book. The door opened. She simply said, unsure on how to explain it. Wait a minute, incantation. What kind of incantation? Piper pressed, crossing her arms in a disapproving manner. Well, it said something about there being three essentials of magic. The first is your feelings. The second is timing and the last is the phases of the moon. If we were ever gonna do this, now, midnight on a full moon, was the most powerful time. Do this, what? Phoebe bit her lip. Receive our powers, she replied meekly. Our powers. Wait, our powers. You included me in this? Piper asked, frustrated. She glanced at Prue as if waiting for some kind of confirmation. She included all of us. Prue interrupted, reading from the book. Bring your powers to us sisters three. She closed the book. It's a book of witchcraft. Let me see that. Prue stood up and handed Piper the book. Elsewhere, at a crime scene, a woman's murder was being examined. One of the cops, Andy, and his partner were among those investigating the scene. Andy looked at the tattoo on her neck. It was a full circle with 3 interlocking arcs inside. What is it? The cop asked. I don't know. It's the same tattoo that we found on the other 3 victims, he observed, turning to look at Daryl as he approached. So the murderer is killing occults, Daryl stated, looking down at the woman. Andy frowned and decided to bring up his theory again, now that there was a bit more evidence backing it. No, the murderer is on a witch hunt, he insisted, covering the body back up with the white sheet. Oh, yeah, and he is 500 years old and lives in Salem. Daryl agreed sarcastically with a roll of his eyes. Look around, Trudeau. Pentagrams, altars, offerings, all tools of a freak fest, he continued, turning around and pointing towards the altar in the room. They call them Sabbaths, which is hardly a freak fest seeing as she was a solitary practitioner. She practiced her craft alone. Andy responded, pushing his point. Right, Daryl replied in disbelief but decided it best to let it go. However, Andy was unwilling to let it go. Let me ask you something, Morris. Do you believe in UFOs? He asked. Hell, no, he quickly replied. Neither do I, Andy agreed, nodding. But do you believe there are people out there that do believe in UFOs? He asked, eagerly awaiting Daryl's response. Yes, but I think they're crazy. Well, then why can't you believe there are people who believe there are witches? A short silence followed Andy's question. Look, all I know is that if you don't stop talking about witches, I'm going to start questioning you, Daryl responded slowly. A cat came to Andy's feet and meowed. Andy leaned down and patted her, taking a brief glance at the cat's collar. It had the same symbol on it that was tattooed on the witch. I'd stay away from that cat, Trudeau. It's been clawing the crap out of everybody, he warned, and then began to walk away. See you at the car, he called over his shoulder. At the manor, the 3 sisters were walking down the stairs as Prue began to rant at Phoebe. Spirit boards, books of witchcraft. It figures all this freaky stuff started when you arrived. Hey, I wasn't the one that found the spirit board, Phoebe replied defensively. It wasn't my fingers sliding around on the pointer, Prue countered. It doesn't matter. Because nothing happened, right, Phoebe? When you did the incantation? Piper asked, trying to stop the fighting. My head spun around and I vomited split pea soup. How should I know? Asked an irritable Phoebe. Well, everything looks the same, Piper said as she glanced around. Yeah, you're right, yet the house still needs work, Prue pointed out as she and Phoebe left, leaving Piper alone with a flashlight. And everything feels the same, so nothing's changed. She looks over to where her sisters were. Right. Morning soon came and the figure from the night before watched as another figure appeared outside. Whoever it was meant to bring the girls harm, and he couldn't allow that. Phoebe yawned as she walked into the kitchen. She had spent most of the night reading the Book of Shadows and didn't get much sleep. You're up early, Piper greeted Phoebe. I never went to sleep, she answered her as she rubbed her eyes. Piper smiled wider and sat down next to her little sister. Don't tell me you put on a black conical hat and spent the night flying around the neighborhood on a broomstick, she questioned teasingly. Phoebe rolled her eyes at Piper's question and shook her head. The only broom I've ever owned was kept in a closet beside a mop, she retorted, laughing softly. Piper narrowed her eyes in suspicion. So what were you doing? She asked, unsure if she actually wanted to know or not. Reading, she replied cryptically, then looked back towards Piper. Is Prue around? She went to work early, Piper responded, pausing for a moment. Reading, aloud, she pressed nervously. Phoebe may think this whole idea of witchcraft was humorous, but Piper was against the idea of black magic. No, Phoebe responded, wondering if she should even voice her suspicions with Piper. In the end, she was too excited to hold it in and decided to explain. But, according to the Book of Shadows, one of our ancestors was a witch named Melinda Warren, she began, watching Piper's reaction closely. Piper immediately stiffened at the mention of the book and took up the disapproving glance usually seen on Prue. And we have a cousin who's a drunk, an aunt who's manic, and fathers who are invisible, she replied sarcastically, getting to her feet and heading towards her jeep that was parked on the curb. I am serious. She practiced powers. 3 powers in fact. She could move objects with her mind, see the future and stop time. But before Melinda burned at the stake, she vowed that each generation of Warren witches would grow stronger and stronger, culminating in the arrival of 3 sisters. Piper put on her coat and grabbed her purse. These sisters would be the most powerful witches the world has ever known. I think that we are those sisters. Look, I know what happened last night was weird and unexplainable, but we are not witches and we do not have special powers. Besides, Grams wasn't a witch and, as far as we know, neither was Mom. She kissed Phoebe on the forehead. So, take that, Nancy Drew. Piper walked out the door. Phoebe moved to the porch. We are the protectors of the innocent. We're known as the charmed ones. And I beg to differ about Grams. Phoebe went back inside and closed the door. At the restaurant known as the Quake, Piper arrived, hoping that she would pass her audition meal with flying colors. Time had passed as she began fixing the meal that was assigned to her on the index card. Just as she was pouring the port wine in a measuring cup, Chef Moore entered the kitchen. Chef Moore, in his French accent, spoke while clapping his hands. Your time is up. Chef Moore called, coming into the audition room, smiling expectantly at Piper. Piper jumped in surprise, nearly dropped the measuring cup, a look of fear crossing her features. Let's see. Roast pork with gratin of fennel and penne with a port giblet sauce. He read her audition recipe in his French accent. Chef Moore. Piper responded softly, desperately trying to think of some way to gain a few extra seconds to add the wine. What? He asked, picking up a fork, ready to sample. The port, she continued, pointing behind her to the measuring cup, her face paling. Yes, without the sauce, it is nothing more than a salty marinara from a woman's magazine. Pooh, Chef Moore replied, not casting Piper a look. I didn't have time for that. Piper began frantically trying to explain but was interrupted by a cough from Chef Moore, clearly telling her to keep silent. But, she stammered as he began to raise the fork to his mouth. Piper panicked and put her hands up as if to make a frantic grab to stop him. Everything around her froze. Chef Moore with his mouth half open. Chef Moore, she whispered in disbelief, waving her hand in front of his face, looking for a response. With no response forthcoming, she suddenly realized she could finish her recipe. She spun around and grabbed a baster, filling it with wine from the measuring cup and ran back to Chef Moore. She dribbled some onto the forkful of food that he was about to eat. Just as she put the baster behind her back, everything unfroze and Chef Moore put the food in his mouth. He smiled in surprise and nodded slightly. It is very good, c'est magnifique, he praised. Piper was confused as her thoughts went back to the previous night. It couldn't be. Prue sat at her desk, fiddling with a pen as she tried to concentrate on the paperwork in front of her. She soon realized that she wouldn't be able to focus, so she dropped the pen on her desk, shut down her computer, and simply left her office. As she was leaving, she happened to overhear Roger's voice drifting out of the open door of his office. Well, it was my idea to spark corporate interest in private donations. Not only have I been with this project since its inception, but we both know who really secured the entire exhibit. He spoke into his phone as he swung his chair around, only to catch sight of Prue at the door, clearly having heard his every word. Prue, he froze for a split second but, before he could say anything, Prue spoke. I quit. She quickly said, crossing her arms across her chest. Roger, who was shocked, suddenly remembered who he had on the phone and hastily whispered in it, I'm going to have to call you back, before turning to face Prue again. Think about this, Prue, Roger replied. There was a short pause as Prue humored him before speaking again. Lousy job, lousy pay, and lousy boss. What's there to think about? She asked, a slight smile crossing her features as she put Roger in an uncomfortable position. Your future. Because, believe me, if you walk out of here without any notice, you can kiss any references. Don't threaten me, Roger. Prue countered, her eyes turning cold and fierce. You know me, had to try, he said, trying to play it off. Look, you're hurt, you're angry, your pride is wounded. I understand all that. That's why you can't see that I'm doing you a favor. He added half hopefully. Prue couldn't help but send him a look of disbelief. Excuse me. I had to take the exhibit away from you. If I hadn't, the board would have come and put a total stranger in my place. Think about it, Prue. I'm here for you, not some stranger. You should be thanking me, not leaving me. She nearly laughed and looked up at him, smiling. Well, I'm not worried. I'm sure your intellect will make quick work of the 75 computer disks and thousands of pages of research I left in my office. She countered sarcastically, her smile growing as Roger's face fell at the realization of the consequences upon her leaving. You're going to regret this, he replied grimly as he advanced a step, but Prue didn't back down and held her gaze confidently. Oh, I don't think so. I thought breaking up with you was the best thing I'd ever done, but this definitely tops that. Goodbye, Roger. She responded in a cheery tone as she turned and walked out the door for the last time. Fuming and dumbfounded, he could only think of one thing to try and make her stay. Your sisters, think about your sisters. If you walk away now they'll. He trailed off as Prue fixed him with such a look of anger that he immediately fell silent. She took a deep breath to steady herself and, with one last look of disgust, turned the corner into the hall. His voice drifted out behind her. I hope there are no office supplies in your purse. He called as she disappeared. Prue clenched her hands around an invisible neck and pushed into an adjoining hall. As she did so, the tie around Roger's neck suddenly tightened and he struggled for breath. He tried to tug it off to no avail and he frantically searched his desk for a pair of scissors to cut it off. He managed to get it off, but fell from his chair in the process. What the hell was that? Roger wondered vaguely while lying on the floor. In the meantime, outside on the sidewalk at the phone booth, Piper was attempting to reach her sister. Come on, Phoebe. You've got to be there. Phoebe, answer the phone. Answer the phone. She hung up and walked out of the booth, as there was no answer. Jeremy walked up to her. Oh, God, Jeremy, you scared me. She exclaimed, still slightly frightened as she paused to compose herself. I can see that. I'm sorry. You okay? He asked as Piper took a moment to calm down. Yeah, now I am. I really am. What are you doing here? She asked him, surprised. He usually didn't show up out of the blue. Well, I wanted to be the first to congratulate you on your new job, he said with a congratulatory smile. You always surprise me. How did you know? We prepared your specialty, and everyone's who's ever sampled your work can truly see how talented you are. I get so turned on when you talk about food. Hamburgers, hot dogs, pizza. They prepared to kiss when a bird flew over and shitted on Jeremy. At that same time, Phoebe was out and about, riding her bike, when suddenly she had a premonition. In it, she saw two boys on skateboards on a sidewalk. Suddenly they crossed the street, not taking caution to their surroundings, so they missed the car turning the corner and speeding down the roar. Before anyone could do anything, the boys skated right in front of a car, which hit them. Phoebe looked around, the premonition finished. Phoebe continued riding and then saw the car and the two boys. No, wait, stop, watch out, she shouted as she rode in front of the boys, stopping them from skating in front of the car. She fell over a parked car on the hill. The car honked and Phoebe fell off her bike, holding her right arm. Kit is nearby. Some guy and the boys go to her. Somebody call an ambulance. Try elevating her arm, but don't straighten it or you'll cause further injuries. Miss, are you okay? The blonde-haired man asked the witch. Yeah. Pain surged through Phoebe's arm. Try not to move, the man said as he placed 2 fingers against her injured arm. Surprisingly enough, the pain began to melt. Instead of focusing on the relief, though, the young witch found herself being lost in the stranger's blue eyes. The ambulance had arrived shortly after to take the injured woman to the hospital. Some time had passed and Prue arrived, walking up to the front desk, where Inspector Trudeau was standing, his back turned. Hi, I'm looking for my sister, Phoebe Hallowell. 1 second please. The nurse said, and then said to Andy, what was the name again? Detective Andrew Trudeau. Homicide. Dr. Gordon's expecting me. He replied, showing her his police mark. Surprise flashed across Prue's eyes and she looked at him closer as if disbelieving. However, to her annoyance, the receptionist left without telling her anything about Phoebe. Andy turned around to look at who had called his name, the surprise evident in his eyes. Prue. All the frustration with the case flew from his mind and he smiled as he realized Prue was no less surprised than he was. I haven't seen you since high show. When we broke up, Prue hastily finished. So, anyway, what are you doing here? I'm here to pick up Phoebe. She had some sort of an accident, she explained. Is she going to be okay? Andy asked, worry evident in his voice. Prue bit her lip, not really knowing the answer to that, having not really been told. I think she just fell off her bike, was her response. She once again glanced back at the empty receptionist's desk. What are you doing here? She asked, pushing her thoughts away from Phoebe. There wasn't anything she could do until someone came back. Murder investigation. The latest victim was a nurse here, he explained, pointing toward the files that were still on the counter. Prue didn't really know what to say about that and she again looked down at her hands as an awkward silence fell between the two. Luckily, the receptionist returned at that moment. She spoke to Prue first. Your sister is still in X-ray, so it'll be another 15 minutes. Prue felt slightly relieved by the receptionist's voice. She didn't sound like Phoebe was hurt seriously, but just to make sure, Prue couldn't help but ask, is she okay? The receptionist, who had turned to speak to Andy, turned back to face Prue. Nothing serious, the X-ray is just a precaution. After that is finished, the doctor will speak with you. She clarified before turning back to Andy, who appeared as if he was trying not to laugh. Dr. Gordon's office is to the left and down the hall. He's with a patient right now, but you're welcome to wait outside his office. With that, she turned to leave. You know, Phoebe's busy, Dr. Gordon's busy. Can I buy you a black cup of coffee while we wait? He asked, surprising her. Sure. She accepted as they walked towards the coffee machine. So, you're an inspector now. What can I say? In any other city, I'd be called the detective. Inspector's classier. She agreed as Andy put the coins into the machine. Liking it better already. Your dad must be so proud. Prue thought aloud. Third generation. You bet he's happy. How about you? You take the world by storm. He asked as Prue let out a small sigh, thinking back to the past few days. Well, I'm living back at Graham's house, and as of an hour ago, looking for work. Oh, I heard you moved to Portland. I'm back, he answered and couldn't resist asking about Roger. You, still seeing Roger? Prue narrowed her eyes suspiciously at him. How do you know about him? She demanded, giving him a piercing, but playful, look. Andy suddenly looked a little uncomfortable and obviously wished to get out of answering it. Finding no way out, however, he had to answer. I know people. Andy offered cryptically. Prue quickly puts two and two together. You checked up on me, she accused, her green eyes watching him carefully in order to catch a lie. Andy tried to look away but found he couldn't. I wouldn't call it that. He disagreed. He was relieved that Prue seemed to find it funny and didn't appear angry. What would you call it? Prue asked eagerly, seeing he was trapped. Inquiring minds want to know. He proposed. Prue laughed and rolled her eyes. There was another moment of silence before Andy put his hand out formally. Well, it's been good seeing you, Prue. Yeah, you, too, Andy. Take care. She answered and they both began to turn their separate ways. Prue was looking slightly upset at the formality and Andy apparently felt the same, as he turned back to her. Sometime later, Phoebe was released with her arm bandaged in a wrap. Hey, we need to talk, and not about Roger. Phoebe said, hoping to avoid going down that road. Okay. At the quake, the two sisters found themselves sitting at a bar. The chosen ones. The charmed ones. Phoebe, this is insane. Prue said as the bartender sets their drinks in front of them. Are you telling me that nothing strange happened to you today? You didn't freeze time or move anything. Single quote, single quote. Roger took an exhibit away from me. Look, Phoebe, you may think that you can see the future, which is pretty ironic. She remarked, considering her sister lived for the moment and rarely thought about the consequences of her action. Since you don't think I have one, that my vision of life is as cloudy compared to your perfect hell. Even if you don't want to believe me, just once can't you trust me? I do not have special powers. Prue declared as the cream moved by itself in response to her anger. Really? Another glance and the cream moved from her cup to her coffee. Phoebe was the first to break the silence. Looks pretty special to me. Oh my god. It just I can move things with my mind. Prue asked, startled by what she just witnessed. With how much you hold inside, you should be a lethal weapon by now. I don't believe it, Prue muttered to herself, feeling a major migraine coming on. This means that Piper must be able to freeze time. Prue grabbed a shot of tequila and drank it all. Are you okay? Phoebe asked, concerned. No, I am not okay. You turned me into a witch. Prue hissed. You were born one. We all were. And I think we better start learning to deal with it. With the third amigo, she was sharing a cab with Jeremy while holding a box of fortune cookies. Has anything weird or unexplainable ever happened to you? She asked, still uncertain if she should tell him or not. Sure. It's called luck or fate, or some people call it miracles. Why? What happened? Forget it. Even if I could tell you, you'd swear I was crazy. Open your fortune cookie, she said, handing him one. Okay. He opened it and read the bit of paper. Soon you will be on top, he said as the figure, who had hitched a ride on top of the cab, closed his eyes, trying not to laugh. That was 1 point for him. Too bad he had to kill her. Though, he would be sure to make sure the fortune at least came true in the future. It doesn't say that, Piper accused, glaring at him playfully. Yes it does, Jeremy insisted, smiling innocently. Piper, still doubting, grabbed the paper out of his hand and began to read it. Is it a bad thing? Of the world soon you will be on top of the world, she corrected, rolling her chocolate brown eyes and throwing the paper back at him. Jeremy laughed and got the cab driver's attention. Hey, can you make a left on 7th, please? He asked rhetorically, pointing to the street. You got it. The driver responded, turning the cab in that direction. 7th. I thought we were going to your place. Piper replied, looking at Jeremy quizzically. We are. But you reminded me of something I want to show you at the old Bowing building. The view of the Bay Bridge, it's amazing. Jeremy explained, flashing a charming smile back at Piper. Meanwhile, Phoebe and Prue had begun walking down the sidewalk. When I was looking in the Book of Shadows, I saw these wood carvings. They looked like something out of a Bosch painting, all these terrifying images of these three women battling different incarnations of evil. Evil fighting evil, that's a twist. Actually, a true witch is a good witch. They follow this Wiccan lead, and it harm none, do what ye will. If a witch violates this oath, they become known as a warlock. A warlock has but one goal, to kill witches and obtain their powers. Unfortunately, they look like regular people. They could be anyone, anywhere. Prue and Phoebe came to a stop. Okay, wait a second. And this has what to do with us? Prue asked. The women in the first wood carving were in the slumber, but in the second one, they were battling some sort of warlock. I think that as long as we were in the dark about our powers, we were safe. But not anymore. Well, here we are, Jeremy said, introducing the old Bowing building. I don't care how amazing the view is. I'm not going in there. Come on, come on. I have a surprise inside. They stepped inside an elevator. Jeremy pressed the button and the elevator began to go up. You are gonna love this. I bet you'll tell Prue and Phoebe the moment you see them. I never mentioned Phoebe came home, Piper responded, suddenly becoming suspicious. Whoops. He muttered and stuck his hand in his back pocket, feigning casualness. The next second he had spun around with a knife pointed straight at Piper, who jumped slightly in surprise. What is that? Piper asked, taking a step back, but not really frightened since she was with Jeremy. It's your surprise, he answered, twirling the knife in his hand and taking a small step toward her. Jeremy, stop it, you're scaring me, she ordered, looking aggravated. He continued to advance. Damn it, I'm serious, she snapped, sounding remarkably like Prue. Jeremy grinned, enjoying her ignorance and continuing his slow advance. So am I. See, I've waited 6 months for this, in fact ever since Grams went to the hospital. You see, I've known for some time that the moment that old witch croaked that all your powers would be released as soon as the three of you came together. All that was needed was for Phoebe to return. It was you, wasn't it? You killed all those women. Piper stated, almost in disbelief. Not women, witches. Jeremy clarified. Why? Piper asked in a small voice. Jeremy held up his other hand and flames shot out of his fingertips. It was the only way to get their powers. H explained, grinning. His face began to contort and his voice became deeper and darker as he finished. And now I want yours. Piper screamed as Jeremy raised his arm, about to stab Piper. She put her hands up and he suddenly froze, as did the elevator. She pulled away from Jeremy. Okay, think, stay calm. Think, think. I gotta get outta here. Okay, she muttered to herself, seeing her only escape is to climb out of the frozen elevator. She carefully moved around Jeremy, watching him closely in case he unfroze before climbing out onto the next level. Just as she set foot on the floor, Jeremy unfroze and grabbed her leg, trying to pull her back in. Piper screamed again and reached for the stairs to grab onto. As her grip on the stairs was about to give way, she reached for a long piece of wood, which she turned around and hit him across the head with. Jeremy fell to the floor, unconscious, and Piper ran off as fast as she could for home. Prue, it's Roger. Look, I'm sorry about what happened. Call okay. Single quote. Prue came in, holding Kit, and pressed a button on the answering machine. Well, Piper's definitely not home, unless she's turned into a cat. Prue opened the back door and put the cat down. Where did that cat come from? Phoebe asked curiously. I don't know. You must have left the window open. Prue closed the door. Did Piper leave a message? Number. She's probably out with Jeremy. Roger called. Yeah, that's why I pressed the delete button. The front door opened as Piper stumbled in, her clothes and hair disheveled. Prue. Phoebe. Piper choked out, pushing into the manor and slamming the door closed behind her, locking it shut. In here, Prue answered. Surprise suddenly filled her face as she went to Piper. Oh my god, what happened to you? Quick, check the windows and lock the doors. We don't have much time. In the Book of Shadows, did it say how to get rid of A warlock? Phoebe interrupted, guessing Piper's thought. Piper nodded silently. Piper began to explain what happened as Prue reverted to her first instinct, taking charge. I'm calling the cops. Prue picked up the phone. And tell them what? That we're witches. Piper pulled the phone away from her and put it down. That some freak with powers beyond comprehension is trying to kill us. Besides, even if the cops did come, they'd be no match for Jeremy, and we'd be next. Phoebe came down the stairs with the Book of Shadows in her hands. I found our answer. It's our only hope. Come on. Prue and Piper followed Phoebe up the stairs. They sat in a circle on the floor around a circle of candles with a bowl in the middle. They had placed candles in a circle around them. Now, we've placed the 9 candles anointed with oil and spices in a circle, Phoebe instructed. Where are the roses that Jeremy gave you? Asked Prue. Right here. Piper showed them a rose. Okay. Then all we need is the poppet. Phoebe said as Piper gets the poppet. Okay. I'm ready. Your love with wither and depart, from my life and my heart, leave me be, Jeremy, and go away forever. Piper pushed 2 roses thorns in the poppet. The spell is complete. Okay, let's hope it works. Piper placed it in the pot. They watched the poppet and rose burn. It then exploded and caught on fire. They screamed and jumped back. Jeremy was walking down the street when suddenly he began screaming in pain. Hundreds of thorns tore through his skin. Do you think it worked? Prue asked. Let's hope so, Phoebe said. I still can't believe it was Jeremy. Phoebe suddenly stopped and gasped as she reached the dining room. What is it? Prue asked. What's wrong? The incantation. It didn't work. A rather panicked Phoebe clarified. What? Piper asked in a panicked manner. How do you know? Because I just saw Jeremy. Jeremy burst through the door. Hello, ladies. Prue stood in front of Phoebe and Piper. They slowly walked backward. Piper, Phoebe. Prue uses her power against the warlock, who is flung into a wall. Get out of here now. The sisters ascended up the stairs. Cool parlor trick, bitch. You were always the tough one, weren't you, Prue, huh? You didn't even cry at your mommy's funeral. And I won't be crying at yours. She used her powers again, making him hit the wall. She ran upstairs to join her sisters. Phoebe, I'm sorry. Prue suddenly apologized. For what? For not trusting you. An insufferable dark laugh echoed outside as a red glow appeared from the floor. The sisters backed up to a standing lamp. Suddenly, a fire surrounded them. What do we do? We're trapped. The fire disappeared, a big dust snake-like thing that circled around them appearing in its place. Its face looked like Jeremy's. They screamed. Suddenly, it blew away and created a tornado around them. The door burst open, revealing Jeremy. Shortly after, materializing out of a separate gust of wind, a black-robed figure appeared. Oh God, another one! Phoebe cried out, feeling the situation was now hopeless. Relax, I'm not here to harm you girls. At least not at the moment. The robed figure spoke in a crisp and controlled tone. It was powerful and self-assured. Those powers of yours don't belong to the unworthy. I don't know who you are, but I saw these girls first. Unless you want to be turned to ash, I suggest you leave. A low-level weakling like this poses no threat. Weakling. I'll show you, weakling. The warlock screamed as he launched a fireball at the figure. It impacted and fizzled out, having no effect. No. Impossible. Is that it? Now it's my turn, he said as he lifted the warlock into the air and snapped his fingers. A sickening crunch filled the room as the warlock screamed in agonizing pain. His body slowly turned pale as he was covered up to his shoulders in solid ice. His body frozen and unable to move, he crashed down on the floor, motionless. You are of the charmed. The incantation, the power of 3, use it to vanquish him, the cloaked man said, kicking the spirit board towards them. Phoebe and Piper began chanting the incantation. The power of 3 will set us free. The power of 3 will set us free. The power of 3, they chanted. We cannot do this without you. Say it. You have got to trust me, Phoebe said to Prue, who nodded. The trio then held hands. The power of 3 will set us free. 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 No, I am not the only one. I'm one of the millions. In places, you can't even imagine. In forms, you would never believe. We are all around you. You won't be the last. You will never be safe. And you will never be free. He turned his attention to the other demon. But you. Why would you help? Jeremy exploded and disappeared. The dust faded from existence. The power of 3, Prue mumbled. Good. I was afraid I wouldn't get a chance at you 3 myself, he said with a dark chuckle. Their eyes widened. Don't look so shocked. I don't really look like some kind of guardian angel, do I? He asked. He asked as he conjured a nondescript katana. Prue tried to use her telekinesis to jerk the blade out of the figure's hand, to no avail. Sorry, you'll have to try harder, he said as Piper waved her hands, attempting to freeze him, also with no effect. You're far too weak in your current state for your powers to have any effect. No, wait, I won't let my sisters pay for my mistake. Take me, but leave my sisters alone. Phoebe said bravely, albeit nervously as the figure rose its eyebrow under the hood. You idiot, there's no way we'll let you sacrifice yourself for us, Prue said, standing protectively in front of her. If he wants one of us, he has to take all of us, Piper added, standing in front of Phoebe as well. Piper, Prue, Phoebe whispered, touched. A very touching scene, and luckily for you ladies I don't get off on hunting down defenseless prey. I'll be seeing you three soon provided you don't die before then. The name is Tempest, remember is. The figure said as he disappeared in a column of wind and ice. The sisters could finally let out a breath of relief. After spending most of the night hopped up on adrenaline and paranoia, the three sisters were finally able to get a few hours worth of sleep before they could start the day. Prue picked up the morning paper and was about to head back inside when she was greeted with a, "Good morning." Prue turned around to find Andy standing at the bottom of the stairs. Hey, this is a surprise. Yeah, I heard a neighbor complain about a noise last night. I was just wondering, is everything okay? Or did you throw a party you didn't invite me to? I'm fine, and believe me, there was no party here last night. I don't know why anyone complained. Some people are strange. She looked down and finally saw that Andy was holding a cup of coffee and a newspaper. I've been feeling really guilty about that bad cup of coffee. I just wanted to make it up to you. Andy explained, closing what was left of the distance between them. So, you brought me a good cup of coffee? Prue guessed, eyeing the cup in his hand. He followed her gaze down to the cup. Oh, this. No, this is mine. He clarified and then began to look slightly nervous. I, just wanted to ask you out to dinner. Unless, of course, you're afraid. Andy added, watching her closely. Prue blushed ever so slightly and bit her lip nervously. Afraid of what? She asked. Oh, you know, having too good a time, stirring up old memories, rekindling an old flame. He joked casually. Prue nodded slightly as he spoke as if she agreed. Good point. Better not, Prue replied, going along with the joke. Okay, Andy responded and then continued, unfazed, Friday night, 8 o'clock. His smile faded when she didn't immediately reply. You hesitated, he observed. Yeah, but it's not what you think, she spoke up hastily. It's just that my life has gotten a bit complicated, she tried to explain cryptically. She was silent for a moment before finishing, can I call you? Sure, Andy agreed as he pulled one of his business cards out of his pocket and handed it to her. She smiled gratefully and took it. Andy glanced at his watch and saw he needed to head on to work. Take care, Prue, he called softly, turning to leave. Bye, Andy. She echoed and then looked back at the door to the manor, which opened and her three sisters came running out, Piper in the lead. I told you I heard a man's voice, Piper informed Phoebe, alerting their sister and the cop to their presence. Hey Piper. Phoebe. Andy greeted them as Phoebe and Piper gave him a half wave. Hi. Hey stranger. Andy noticed the cat in Phoebe's arms. Is that your cat? It is now, Phoebe said, scratching the cat's ear, causing her to purr. It looks familiar, he shook away the thought. Well, I'll see you later then. He started to leave, only to stop and turn around. Yes. The sisters answered simultaneously, causing him to raise an eyebrow of confusion. Some other time. Andy turned back and headed back down the steps, getting into his car and driving away. Do you think Andy knows about us? Prue wondered aloud. Piper answered her with a definite, no. Prue looks at Kit, who purrs in response. I think she knows about us. Who would ever believe her anyway? Phoebe asked. That's true. They started to walk back toward the house. So, what are we going to do now? Same thing that we've always done. Borrow each other's clothes, hog the phone, but no matter what, we'll always be sisters, right? Prue said. Yeah, sister witches. Phoebe said, walking into the house. Prue looked back at the door, about to close it, when she smiled mischievously. Instead, she flicked her hand and it magically swung shut. Chapter 2. Naruto really wished Penny could have come up with a better alternative than just sealing the girl's powers. That much he had learned from the journals he had found. Shortly after the girl's powers had been bound for their protection, the blonde took to the shadows and watched over them. At least that was the bits and pieces he put together told him from the gaping hole in his memory. He had gotten used to their habits, giving them their privacy at times, of course. Prue, the early riser, was always the first up in the morning and the first out of the door. Phoebe, always cranky in the morning and was a bit of a coffee junkie and needed it for the morning, and Piper, poor Piper, really hated her job and always seemed to put off leaving the house every morning. Slipping into Piper's room, he slit the throat of yet another demon intruder. Eventually these low-level stragglers were going to have to get the point. Sitting down on the bed, he softly ran his finger through her hair. Curious, he decided to invade her dreams. Piper found herself in the arms of a handsome stranger. She couldn't quite see his face, but all she knew was that was something quite familiar about him. She moaned as the sensation of his fingers against her naked skin of her torso under her top, sending tingles through her being. The man's lips pressed against her neck, nipping and sucking at the flesh. He slowly worked down her neck as his right hand massaged her stomach. His hot breath and gentle touches was turning on. She couldn't help but let out a cry as she felt her left hand massage her right thigh. One huge positive point to this mysterious man was the fact that he was quite flexible at times. She let out a sensual cry as the man used his teeth to pull loose the string of her top. Her body became flush as the man undid her top and caressed her bosom. She threw her head back as his knee pressed against her crotch as his attention was focused on her breath. Piper let out a squeak as the man repositioned himself between her legs, grabbing her arms and pulling her close as his hardness pressed into her. The man removed shorts and boxers as his hardness teased her core. "Please," she whispered. "More," she moaned as her lover continued teasing her. She rose up her rear as the lover grabbed at the hem of her pajama bottoms, sliding them off along with her panties. Piper bit her bottom lip once more as he inserted 2 fingers into her opening, pumping it in and out. Her hips bucked against them as blissful screams started to radiate out of her mouth. Using the thumb of his left hand, he between gently brushing against her clitoris as the rest of his thumb brushed against her labia minora as he laid kisses against her clitoral hood. He slowly increased the intensity as he felt her walls began constricting around her fingers. Harder," she said louder. Removing his thumb, the lover added his tongue to the mix as he continued speeding up. "Yes. Almost. I'm almost there," he continued as Piper gripped her sheets and arched her back with a "yes," as she erupted with an orgasmic bliss. With a soft she softly panted as the man licked her juices off his finger. The man moved over Piper as he captured her lips with a sweet kiss. He captured her bottom lips between his 2 lips as he pressed his body against hers. "You're beautiful. You've always been," he said as he captured her lips in a kiss again as their tongues danced against each other. "I want you. I need you. Then have me. Oh, trust me. I will," he said with a distinct sort of possessiveness as he spread her legs. He slowly entered her as he held her by the hips. "Yes," she hissed. A few moments passed before Piper's love began moving in and out of her. Their kisses became sensual and hungry as they caressed each other's body. "Piper, I love the way you sound." "Yes, faster," she cried out as she wrapped her legs around his waist. "More. Oh God," she cried out as her lover wrapped one of her arms around her back and hoisted her up slightly as he continued thrusting inside of her. He was going as deep as he could. "Ooh. Da-da. Da-da. I'm almost there. Come with me, baby," he said as Piper put her hand against the back of her lover's head as her hips bucked against his thrusts. "Yes," they both cried out and released. They fell back, the lover shooting several spurts into her. The lover head rested gently against Piper's bosom as the last of his seed seeped from his cock. "Amazing, as always," he said, reaching out and kissing her hand. "You're not so bad yourself." "But, what do I call you?" she asked as the lover smiled. My name is." The sound of the alarm blaring woke Piper up from her dream. Startled, she shot up, sweaty and sticky. She glanced at her clock as it read 7 a.m. With a groan as she fell back. Unknown to her, someone was gazing down at her beyond her ability to see. Have a good day. Later that day, two figures had met within a room. The room was that of a corporate business room where meetings between the head and the many stockholders of a company would meet. Two black-robed figures were in the room as their followers left. You had the charmed ones right in your grasp and you let them go? The being asked in disbelief. Either you're very confident or you're foolish to do such a thing, the first figure said in a raspy voice. The former is what it is, my friend. I can handle them at any time, but then it'll be a bore, so I decided to wait so things will be all more entertaining. The figure said as his eyes glowed crimson. He raised his hand and shot massive amounts of power into the core of the earth, causing earthquakes throughout the area above. You are quite confident that they won't become too much for your power. I know what I'm doing, but since you're so concerned, how about a little game? I pull some strings and send a couple of my followers after them, and if these women can overcome the folly of humanity and manage to survive them, then I'll admit my choice not to eliminate them was not a folly. They are no threat after all, or do these rookie witches scare you? I fear no mortal. Very well, Tempest, I'll play this little game of yours for the time being. At a popular San Francisco hotspot was that of a restaurant known as the Quake, packed with people coming and going. There was business for the owner, who seemed to be going really well. Phoebe Hallowell, the youngest of the three witches, nearly bumps into a couple just entering the restaurant. Oops. Sorry, she said, straightening her black spaghetti strap dress as she continued by them searching for Piper. Piper walks out of the kitchen carrying a bill with a black dress of her own. I'm going to kill him, Piper muttered, throwing her hands up dramatically. She grabbed a bill folder off a table and walked toward the cash register. Who? Phoebe asked, glancing around in confusion, before she followed Piper. Chef Moore. He of the phony accents hires me and then quits while opening his own place. Thank you very much, Piper ranted, going behind the cash register as Phoebe took a seat. I don't see any customers complaining, Phoebe pointed out as a compliment to her stressed older sister. Hello, she said, then angrily spouts off. I am not a restaurateur. I am a chef. I have no idea what I'm doing. Then stops and looks at Phoebe. Are you wearing my dress? Piper asked as her anger fizzled into annoyance. Though before that could continue, they were joined by a woman by the name of Brittany Reynolds with blonde shaggy hair wearing a red dress. Hey Brittany, Phoebe greeted the blonde curly-haired woman. Hey, she greeted back, flashing a friendly smile. Ooh, I love that tattoo, Phoebe complimented, taking Brittany's hand to get a better look at the angel tattooed on the back. Brittany looked at the tattoo and held it up, saying, oh, thanks. Single quote. I thought it was illegal to get them on your hand because of the veins. Piper stated as a whole segment about it on TV a couple of weeks ago. In the States, yeah, I got it done in Tahiti, the woman said with a coy smile as she continued showing off her tattoo. Piper hands Brittany back her change. Oh, keep the change, Piper, the woman responded as she placed the strap of her purse over her shoulder. I got to jam, she said as she hopped up and quickly went on her way. Okay, say hi to Max, the new restaurant owner told her as Brittany left. Excuse me, can I buy a Collins with some Sprite? A young man asked. He was in 20s with unusual spiky blonde hair. He had bright, cerulean blue eyes and his skin tone was that of a slightly tan variety. He was about 5 feet 10 in height and wearing quite the formal dark blue dress shirt and black slacks, but what really stood out was that he had whiskers. The sisters couldn't help but stare, noticing the unusual facial features. That interesting, huh? The blonde asked as both sisters blushed in embarrassment. Sorry, I'll get right to that, Piper said as she hurried off to fix that drink. The man in question quickly looked over the youngest Hallowell. You are quite beautiful and that dress looks amazing on you. Oh, why thank you, Phoebe responded with a flirty smile. You must be new in town. I haven't seen you before and I think I would remember you, seeing you. When Phoebe saw something she liked, she went for it and she definitely liked what she saw before her. I'm going to guess it's because of these whiskers, the blonde said, flashing a smile as Phoebe winced slightly, realizing she might have offended the man. Sorry, she remarked with a sheepish look, though the man only smiled. It's okay, I get it all the time. I've actually arrived here a few months ago. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. He introduced himself. That's a nice name. Let me guess, is it Dutch? She tried to guess as Naruto's lips pursed into a playful smile. No, Japanese, the blonde answered her question with a charming smile. Wow, really? You don't look it, she stated and then immediately gasped afterwards, realizing she placed her foot in her mouth. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. It's no problem as I get it all the time, he said, shrugging it off. He really did get it all the time. That's one Collins and that would be. Piper didn't get to finish as the blonde pulled out 100 from his wallet and sat it on the counter. He then picked up his drink. Keep the change, he said as he turned his attention back to the younger sister. Nice meeting you. Phoebe Hallowell, the youngest, introduced herself in an almost dazed-like state. Well, Phoebe Hallowell, I'll see you around, the blonde said as he went on his way and out the door. As he turned, the sisters didn't see the mischievous smile that came upon his face. Damn, I should have asked for his number or something. He was pretty handsome, don't you think? Phoebe asked her sister as she pointedly glanced in the direction where the blonde walked and licked her lips. Yeah, he was, Piper said as watched the door. Something about him seems really familiar. I guess I have to settle for the runner-up, Phoebe said, taking a glance in another direction. Wait, what? Piper responded as her thoughts on the mysterious blonde would be filed away for now. The poster boy to your left, she said as Piper turned to look. Just glance, don't be obvious. After a quick glance, Piper turned back to her sister. I approve. Who is he? She asked, glancing again back at him. His name is Alec, and he's about to come over and ask if he could buy me a martini. Single quote. How do you know? Piper wondered. Let's just say I solved the age-old problem of who approaches whom first. I had a little premonition. She gloated, running a hand through her hair self-consciously. What? Phoebe, you're not supposed to use your powers. We agreed. Piper hissed, crossing her arms. Number. You and Prue agreed. I abstained. Besides, it's not like I can control it. It just popped into my head. Phoebe countered defensively. That's the whole point. None of us can control our powers. That's what scares me. I could panic and freeze the entire restaurant. Single quote. Shish. Here he comes. Phoebe whispered as the man approached. Hey, I was just sitting over there and was wondering if I could buy you a martini or something. He offered hopefully. Phoebe smiled seductively and glanced at Piper knowingly. Martini, imagine that. I would love one, she responded, getting to her feet. It's Alec, right? Phoebe asked, feigning ignorance. Yeah, how'd you know my name? Alec asked in surprise. Wild guess. Phoebe got to her feet and lightly pushed Alec toward the table he had been sitting at. Before she left, she turned one last time at her sister. Piper glanced over and grabbed her hand, making her listen. Prue is going to be pissed, she warned, and Phoebe shrugged it off. News flash, stop worrying, you'll get wrinkles. Phoebe retorted. She added as an afterthought. Who said I was worrying? Piper muttered indignantly, crossing her arms. Outside Quake, Brittany walked out to her car. She turned it on and adjusted her rear view mirror so she could touch up her makeup. After a moment, she adjusted it back and saw someone's eyes staring from the back of her car. She spun around in fear and screamed as he grabbed hold of her. The following morning in the Hallowell Manor, Inspector Andy Trudeau was face down asleep on a semi-unfamiliar bed. Prue, the owner of the room, had gotten up early and was finishing getting dressed. She glanced at the other room's occupant, who was still on the bed sleeping. She picks up her bag and slowly makes her way to the door. She pauses as Andy groans and shifts on the bed only to settle back in bed. Prue carefully slipped out from under Andy's arm and silently reached for an old sweater that she slipped on. She tiptoed around the bed to grab some of her clothes and glanced up at a sleeping Andy. She bit her lip uncertainly, but continued to gather her things. Carrying her high-heeled shoes in one hand and a dark blue dress in the other, she headed for the door of his bedroom and beyond that, the door to his apartment. As Prue reached the door of his bedroom, she froze as Andy groaned softly and switched positions. Again she glanced back uncertainly, but nevertheless continued toward the door. She hadn't gone another step when Andy's alarm clock started beeping loudly. Damn, she thought and frantically narrowed her eyes at the device and sent it flying out the window. Without further ado she left as quickly as she could without making any noise. Behind her Andy reached out to turn off his alarm clock only to land on the end table. A moment later the door of his apartment could be heard being shut, the sound echoing through the silent apartment. Andy sat up in bed quickly realizing that she was gone. Downstairs in the kitchen the Hallowell's cat, Kit jumps up onto the counter and meows. The television set is on and playing a documentary on witches. Proving that they were the devil's disciples was no easy task for the court of the Salem witch trials. The narrator on the TV said as Piper picks up her bowl watching TV. She whisks the eggs absently. But a remarkable event occurred. One of the accused, Mary Este, ran for the church to profess her innocence. Suddenly there was a clap of thunder, and she was struck by a bolt of lightning. In the court's mind, God himself had spoken, forbidding the evil witch from even entering his house. The witches were subsequently convicted of heresy. At that moment Prue walks into the kitchen wearing a gray skirt and black tank top. Piper was wearing a blue shirt and beige pants. Good morning. Prue greeted her sister as she opens the fridge to get something out. Morning. Prue greeted and Piper echoed while hurriedly grabbing for the remote and switching off the TV. What are you watching? She asked curiously as she pulled the milk out and sat it on the counter. Nothing. Just a show. Piper answered hastily, somewhat embarrassed to be seen watching the documentary. About witches. Are you worried that we're going to be burned at the stake? Prue asked teasingly, smiling softly. Piper forced a laugh and tried to look nonchalant. Yeah right, she offered and then switched the topic to Prue. By the way, Andy called. Prue suddenly looked nervous. When? Prue carefully asked in response as she poured herself a glass of milk. While you were in the shower, Piper answered. What did you tell him? She demanded, glaring at her sister. Piper was taken aback by Prue's attitude. That you were in the shower, she carefully answered once more repeating her previous statement. Prue nodded awkwardly appearing relieved. Piper smirked as she tried to analyze Prue's unusual attitude. Bad date? She questioned, watching her elder sister carefully for a hint of a lie. No, not at all. It was great. You know, dinner, movie and sex. The last part came out in a soft, embarrassed whisper. Excuse me. On your first date you sleaze. She said with a teasing tone. It wasn't exactly our first date, Piper. She added half hopefully. Piper nodded but rolled her eyes. Okay, but high school doesn't count. That was last decade, she retorted. Spill. She prodded eagerly. Prue cast a frustrated glance while she grabbed her cup of milk and walked out of the kitchen. Ooh, that bad? She asked, following. Number. Actually that good. Single quote. Prue stops at the dining table and picks up the paper. It was, well, we were amazing, but that's not the point. I told myself that things would be different, that we would take it slow. It just shouldn't have happened. That's all. Prue tried to explain, but it was difficult because of the conflicting emotions. Piper glanced at her in sympathy but before she could respond Phoebe came walking down the stairs to join the conversation. What shouldn't have happened? Phoebe asked curiously. Prue slept with Andy. Piper filled them in quickly without turning to look at them. Hello, Phoebe remarked, surprised at this little tidbit. Prue could have slammed her head against the wall in frustration. Thanks a lot, mouth. She muttered, picking up the newspaper from the end table. Wait, you were going to tell her but not me. Family meeting. Phoebe replied acting hurt. Speaking of last night, what time did you end up rolling in? Prue asked as she turns and made way for the conservatory. No. Do not change the subject, Phoebe countered Prue's question as her sister turned and sat down in the solarium. Don't dodge the question, Prue retorted back as she sat down with her milk and newspaper on a table and sitting down. It must have been at least after 3. Piper spoke up, enjoying her role in this conversation. I must still be in New York time, Phoebe offered defensively. Actually, that would make it later, Prue returned, smiling at her sister's lie. Or maybe you and Alec. Piper brought up, glancing at Phoebe slyly. Prue looked up confused. Who's Alec? The hottie that she hit on at the restaurant yesterday. Piper informed Prue. Phoebe glared at Piper, who just shrugged and smiled innocently. Excuse me. Where Vision is history, he hit on me. Remember the whole Vision thing? Phoebe pointed out, calmly. Vision thing? Prue asked in annoyance and glanced at Piper in confirmation. She let out a deep sigh. Phoebe, she began. Don't put me in the middle, Piper protested. Technically we're not. You were born in the middle. Look, Phoebe, I thought we agreed, Prue finally finished, ignoring Piper for the time being. No, we didn't. You and Piper agreed. There's a difference, Phoebe clarified, rolling her eyes. Look, Phoebe, our powers are not toys. We have to be careful. They could get us killed. Prue elaborated, trying to make Phoebe understand. She's right. We don't want any more warlocks finding us. Look, it was just a lousy premonition. That's all. Nobody died. Besides, you guys can't control your powers any better than I can. And FYI, nothing happened last night. At least nothing I'm ashamed of. Phoebe turns to leave, but Prue stops her. There's another reason we have to be careful. Andy thinks someone's abducting women in our area. Single quote. Abducting women. What do you mean? Single quote. It means that warlocks aren't the only evil that we have to watch out for. And FYI, I'm not ashamed of anything. Single quote. Phoebe smiles at her and Prue turns to her paper. At the police station, Inspector Trudeau was looking at a photo of Brittany Reynolds, the latest in a long list of victims. He takes a sip of coffee and hands the photo to Daryl, an African American and fellow cop. He was about maybe in his 40s, with short hair and professional looking. Max, Brittany's boyfriend, has reported her missing. She didn't come home at all last night. That's not like Brittany, believe me. Max finished, looking worried as Daryl brought the picture back to him. Tell me, Max, what time did she leave to go to Quake? Daryl Morris asked. 8:30. She called around 10, said she was headed home, but I'm really worried, Max replied as Andy fiddled with a pen, thinking of the similarities between Brittany and some of the other women that had been called in missing. Chances are she'll show up. They usually do. In the meantime, the best thing you can do right now is to go home in case she calls, all right? Annie said and stood up. Can you do that? He asked as they shook hands. Yeah, okay, thanks, Max Jones said, then left. Andy walks over to Daryl. The fourth one this week. Andy pointed out. Yeah, well, they can't just be disappearing into thin air. You do something to your. Well, at least we can narrow down his feeding pool to the area around the restaurant. Single quote. Yeah, well, better tell your sweetie to lock the door tonight. Daryl pushes past Andy. At that same time, Piper had arrived and parked her car in front of the church. She stares at the church's closed door, chewing on her lower lip. Obviously, something's bothering her. Someone knocks their umbrella handle against the car door, causing her to jump. Oh, Pastor Williams. Ooh, you scared me, Piper said as she placed a hand against her chest and breathed out in relief. I'm sorry. Aren't you a little early? Dropping off the unused food from your restaurant. I thought you weren't coming by till this afternoon. Single quote. Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm coming back later with everything. Single quote. Great. So what are you doing here now? Nothing really. Just thinking. Piper responded, trying to gather her thoughts. About. Pastor Williams prodded carefully. Piper bit her lip uncertainly and answered reluctantly. Mary Este. Who? He asked in confusion. Piper rolled her eyes, inwardly kicking herself. Oh, it's just this stupid documentary I saw. By the way, is it true that, evil beings can't go into a church without being, KSSSH? She motions with her hands as if being hit by lightning. Evil beings. Like what? Vampires, he suggested. Vampires? No. I was thinking more along the line of witches. Piper corrected casually, though listening to his every word intently. Witches, huh? Pastor Williams paused, seeming to think about it for a moment. Let me put it to you this way. I sure wouldn't want to risk it. Piper frowned, but nodded slightly. I gotta go. See you later. Yeah, right, absolutely, she replied, being pulled back from her train of thought. Pastor Williams walked away, leaving Piper to look back toward the entrance to the church. She narrowed her eyes in determination and pushed the door open. She slowly approached the church door, outstretching her hand for the handle. Just before she closed her hand around it, a crack of thunder rumbled in the distance and she jumped away in fear. Piper turns and leaves as the church bell rings. At the Buckland auction house, Prue had just arrived for work, trying to catch the elevator. Hold the door, she shouted as she prayed that someone would stop it from closing since she couldn't miss that elevator. Prue squeezed through at the last minute, but her purse hit the door and slipped from her arm, spilling the contents on the floor. Oh, damn it, she muttered, bending down to pick it all up. Can you, 12 please? She pleaded to the man closest to the numbers. He did so and bent down to help her. Here, let me help, he offered, picking up some of her papers and looking at them curiously. 18th century French art. Do you work at the auction house upstairs? He asked, sounding impressed as Prue grabbed her last piece of merchandise off the floor and stood up. Number. Just interviewing, if I ever get there on time. Don't want to get my King Louis mixed up. Prue's phone rings and she answers it. Hello, she said into the phone as she turns away for a modicum of privacy. Andy, how did you get this number? I'm a detective, remember? Prue, I think we should talk. He added in a more serious tone. Yeah, you know, it's just that I'm really late for this interview. She tried to change the subject. I didn't mean for what happened last night to happen. You have to know that. Andy continued, ignoring her excuse. Of course, you know, I'm totally wrong for it anyway. Stuffy old auction house. Don't know why they even called. The man next to her glanced her way, but she ignored it. Come on, Prue, listen to me. We've known each other for a long time. We just couldn't help ourselves. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I know, Andy, she replied, desperately trying to keep her voice down. All we did was make love. I know, Andy, Prue snapped, clenching her phone in aggravation. Well, talk to me. Help me out here, Prue. Why did you sneak out like that? He asked. Prue narrowed her eyes indignantly. I did not sneak out, she replied, lowering her voice at the end as she reminded herself she was in an elevator. Right, you were asleep. I didn't want to wake you, she lied in desperation. There was silence on the other end, so she quickly added. And I did write you a note, I just didn't leave it. The phone disconnects. Andy hears the dial tone and hangs up. Hello, Prue asks, then turns around and finds the elevator is filled with men who have just overheard her conversation. They clear their throats. Rex glances down at Prue. Though he doesn't say anything, it's pretty evident that they all know what's going on. Prue puts her phone away. The elevator stops on the 7th floor, the bell rings and the door starts to open. Prue glances at the elevator panel and sees that there are 4 more stops to make before reaching her floor, which would make her late for the interview. Prue looks at the elevator door and squints her eyes, forcing it to close. The man who wanted to get off on floor 7 steps up to the door only to have it close on him. Hey, he punches the elevator button. It missed my floor. The elevator continues straight up to floor 12, missing the 4 stops in between. The men in the elevator press the elevator buttons, but the elevator continues to head straight up. The elevator stops on floor 12. That was strange, said Rex. Well, lucky you, huh? He asked as the doors open and Prue steps out. Yeah, I'm charmed, all right. Rex stands in the elevator and watches her go. Elsewhere, Phoebe was pushed through the crowded restaurant to reach the bar. She handed a bill folder to a young couple. Here you go, she spoke, handing it to the man who reached out for it. Thank you, he responded gratefully. Phoebe smiled and turned to leave before doing a double take in disbelief. Excuse me, but aren't you Stefan? Phoebe asked, approaching slowly. Stefan glanced back up at her smiling. Yes, I'm sorry, but do we know each other? He questioned, looking at her curiously. Phoebe took several deep breaths to calm herself. Oh, highly doubtful. I'm just familiar with your work. Like everyone else in the world, she admitted, glancing awkwardly back at his date who had been silent. Well, I don't know about that, but I'll always take a compliment from a gorgeous woman. Stefan replied, flashing a charming smile that made Phoebe look back toward the woman he was sitting with. I'm sure your girlfriend must appreciate that, Phoebe answered, trying to judge her reaction. Stefan leaned closer to Phoebe. She's not my girlfriend, he whispered pointedly. Then why are you whispering? Phoebe whispered back flirtatiously. The woman frowned in anger and jumped up from the bar. Excuse me, she hissed, pushing between Phoebe and Stefan, causing Phoebe to step back. Oh, okay, Phoebe murmured, putting her hands up dramatically in innocence. Stefan turned around to watch her leave and Phoebe stepped back forward. Well, it was very nice to meet you, she offered, beginning to turn away. You too, Stefan agreed and then reached out to stop her from leaving. Listen, I'm in town for a couple days doing a Porsche shoot. If you're interested, stop by. I'd love to photograph you. You do model, don't you? Stefan took out a pen and wrote his address on a napkin in front of him and gave it to Phoebe. Phoebe stared in surprise and gingerly reached out to take it. In my dreams, yeah, she replied, and then glanced down at the napkin excitedly before turning away. As she was still staring at the napkin, Piper ran up and grabbed her hands, effectively gaining her attention. A driver has called in sick. Can you do a quick delivery? Piper pleaded desperately. Sure, Phoebe agreed, taking a step back from her sister, but she couldn't resist telling Piper about Stefan. Is that guy at the bar staring at me? She began. Piper cast a quick glance to the bar behind her. A lot of guys at the bar are staring at you. Piper agreed hastily. The one at the far end is tall, dark, brooding, which is very New York. Phoebe described Stefan. Piper glanced over again for a split moment. Sorry, no, she replied and dashed off back to work. Phoebe looked back where Stefan had been to find him gone. Her gaze flickered back to the napkin with his address on it and she smiled. At that same time at Buckland Auction House something was in the works. Rex Buckland's assistant, a tall blonde-haired woman, walks Prue through the floors under construction on their way to Rex Buckland's office. He's seen your resume and is very impressed. I have to tell you he's already blown out 6 other applicants. I still don't know why he's interested. I never even applied, Prue answered, sounding curious. She looked toward the secretary for an answer. He likes what you did at the museum, even though your ex-boss trashed you. I mean, what's Roger got against you anyway? Hard to say, unless shattering his male ego counts for something. He's also my ex-fiancé. Single quote. Got it, you ready? She asked, reaching out for the door handle. Prue nodded slightly. Yeah. The secretary opened the door and preceded Prue into the room. Rex Buckland, this is Prue Hallowell, interviewing for the new specialist. She announced. Prue walked in to find the man next to her in the elevator standing in front of the desk. Her smile turned to a slight frown and she bit her lip slightly, suddenly a little nervous as Rex looked her over quickly. Actually, we've already met. Welcome to my stuffy, old auction house, he said, shaking her hand. Prue clears her throat. A little later that day at Stefan's studio a photo shoot was set up. On the wall is a large photo of a Porsche. The camera is set up on a tripod. Stefan carries a lit candle. His hand is thin and wrinkly with age spots discoloring his skin. He sets the candle in the holder. On the table is a woman, her arms and legs strapped securely to the corners. The woman is the redhead from Quake. She looks up at Stefan as he walks slowly toward her, his face obscured by the shadow offset by the colored screen behind him. Please, I beg you, don't hurt me. Let me go, please, Stefan, the woman begged as he stepped closer to the light. As he steps out he reveals his true form. His form was that of an elderly man with white straggly and sparse hair. He was hunched over slightly, his skin old and wrinkly and his teeth, yellow and crooked looking. Oh, my God. Wait, she screamed out, but it was to no avail. Beams of light shoot out from his eyes to her eyes. The beam of light sucks out all of her youth and turns her into an old woman. Javna is then transformed back into the young, dark, brooding Stefan. He picks up the ornate hand mirror and looks at his reflection. He smiles and laughs. Sorry, Prue, but you can't so easily brush off your destiny. No one should come to harm, and hopefully you three come a step closer to realizing your destiny. Back at the auction house, Prue was busy at work. How many exhibitions did you correct? Buck asked her as she responded, 7, including the Carlton estate. It should be on my resume. Prue added. Franklin Carlton. That's quite a coup, Rex commented, sounding impressed. He dropped the papers on his desk and sat down opposite Prue. Yes, well, I tend to be on the persistent side. I usually get what I want. Prue explained, nodding slightly. Rex offered a faint smile. A no-doubter. Rex agreed and then smiled slyly. It's a shame though that you think you're, how did you put it in the elevator? Totally wrong for the job. Rex reminded her, casually leaning back in his chair for an answer. Prue bit her lip ever so slightly and looked away for a split moment in aggravation. That was a private phone conversation, she countered. Rex shook his head, grinning. Hardly, he retorted. Prue looked away and reached down to grab her purse before standing up abruptly. You called me, remember? Not the other way around. She returned, her voice clearly showing her irritation. There was a pause at which time she was deciding whether to let it go or to continue. And while we're at it, I think it's incredibly unfair of you to eavesdrop on a private call and then misjudge me based on entirely what you thought you heard, Prue added, deciding on the latter. Rex looked away while she accused him, and when she had finished ranting glanced back at her. I apologize. It was unfair of me. He offered and then stood up and approached her. I'm new to all of this, Rex explained, waving his hand to show off the room. I've only just taken over the house from my father, so I'm very protective of it. But knowing that, what you did at the museum, attracting the younger market, it's totally consistent with what I want to do here. He paused for a moment, sitting down on the edge of his desk. Prue glanced away, slightly embarrassed. It's just that, when all these qualifications are signed, it's very important to me that whoever I hire, truly wants to be here. Rex continued, carefully watching Prue's reaction. Before she could respond, there was a beep announcing the presence of the intercom. Yeah, he called, not taking his eyes off Prue. Excuse me, Mr. Buckland, but your next interview is waiting. Shall I reschedule him? The secretary's voice filled the room. No, I think we're done here, he responded icily, picking up Prue's files and handing them to her. She took them and shook his hand formally. Well, thanks for your time, she replied, her voice slightly cold in return. He nodded and watched as Prue turned to leave. Just as she reached the door, she hesitated and turned back around. My area of expertise ranges from the Ming Dynasty to a Mark McGuire Rickey baseball card. You name it, I can identify it. Now, I may not have sought this job originally, but I do want it, and I'm definitely right for it. Prue finished confidently and then left without waiting for a response. Rex watched her leave, pondering the possibilities. Piper pulled Quake's catering van up to the church and parked just outside. Already several people were coming out of the church to help unload. Phoebe jumped out of the passenger side of the car, carrying on the conversation that had been going on in the van. You'd think after last night Prue would be a lot mellower. I mean, how long had it been? 6 months. And she's worse, Phoebe observed, walking around to the back of the van and opening it up. Piper came up from the other side of the van carrying a clipboard and pen. Piper sighed as the conversation kept going and leaned back against the back door. It's just so un-Prue-like to have sex on the first date, she replied, as a woman came up. Phoebe reached into the van and pulled out a tray that she handed to the woman. Everything's changing since we've become, you know, Piper continued, trailing off and giving the woman an annoyed glance before marking that tray off on her clipboard. Phoebe grinned and turned back to the truck. Come on, you've never had sex on the first date? Phoebe asked sarcastically. Piper looked up at her, appearing offended. No, have you? Piper asked, her eyes narrowing. There was silence in which Phoebe just grinned, trying not to laugh. Don't answer that, she snapped, changing her mind. Phoebe pulled another tray out of the truck and looked back up toward her big sister. Well, it's not a regular thing. Of course, now that I'm a witch I'll be able to see if it will be any good or not before it actually. Phoebe elaborated and trailed off as she noticed an elderly man waiting on the tray. She handed it to him and leaned casually against the van door. Hi, she greeted, waving as the elderly man walked off. Piper stared at her in disbelief. What's the matter with you? Are you out of your mind? She scolded. Phoebe rolled her eyes and took out another tray. Come on, it's not like he took me literally. Phoebe retorted, grabbing the last tray out of the van. You don't know that, he could have. Piper argued, checking off the trays on her clipboard, as Phoebe handed the tray to another man. I just think we need to be extra careful, in bed and out. She continued, nodding to herself. Phoebe narrowed her eyes in a studying manner. Yeah, well, there's careful and then there's paranoid. She countered. Do you want to talk about it? Phoebe prodded gently. Piper frowned and looked away. Talk about what? Pastor Williams walks up to the back of the van. Pastor Williams called as he advanced. Hey, Phoebe replied, as Pastor Williams pulled her into a friendly hug. Take a bite out of the big apple, did ya? He joked, waving at Piper. Oh, I ate the worm. Phoebe went along with the joke and stepped back from him. She looked out toward a street store. Hey, I'm going to go get some gum. Do you guys want anything? She asked, looking at the two. No, thanks. Single quote. Okay. Good to see you. You too. Phoebe responded once more as she left. Pastor Williams stands and waits in front of Piper. She sighs. Okay. Here's the deal. I've got this friend. Has a little problem. Could be bad. Not quite sure what to tell her. Single quote. Do you want to go inside? He asked politely, pointing toward the church. A flash of panic shot through Piper and she shook her head hastily. No, she responded immediately, causing Pastor Williams to look at her curiously. I mean, I've got to get going. Piper explained. He nodded in understanding. So what's the problem? He pressed, listening closely. Piper hesitated before taking a deep breath. Well, she sorta thinks she might be a witch, she elaborated, forcing a laugh at the end. Witches again, huh? Pastor Williams asked, nodding. He turned and walked a few steps away and Piper followed nervously. Not a good thing, is it? Piper guessed, looking down at the ground. Certainly not a question I get every day. He commented, thinking about his answer. How well do you remember your Sunday school lessons? Exodus 22:18. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, he quoted slowly. Piper frowned, dreading his answer. Meaning, she whispered, already knowing what he was going to say. If you go by the old school, put her to death, she's evil, Pastor Williams replied carefully. Piper flinched and looked away, despair threatening to overcome her facade. It took all her self-control to force a front and say farewell to Pastor Williams. She quickly returned to the shelter of the van. Meanwhile, in one of San Francisco's many parks, Phoebe stopped in front of a vendor. The cashier who owned the stand was a 40-something who looked like he did not want to be there. Though, Phoebe quickly dismissed it as she browsed through the magazines on the rack. She selects one and picks up a pack of gum. She walks up to the cashier. Here you go, she called, getting the cashier's attention and handing him the stuff. He looked at the price tags on the items and mentally calculated the amount. $3.52. The cashier said as Phoebe digs into her bag for the money. Should we use the grandchildren's birthdays? An elderly man asked. She looks up and sees an elderly couple with a lottery ticket. He looks at her and smiles. It's a $10 million jackpot. Who knows? I mean, today may be our lucky day. Single quote. Maybe. Phoebe agreed anyway. If not, we're going to lose our house. Single quote. Phoebe picks up a lottery ticket. As soon as she touches it, she has a premonition. Quick flash of the California Lottery Super Lotto balls appear on the television set. 41619303240. 4, 16, 19, 30, 32, and 40. Those are the winning numbers. Single quote. Yeah, right, lady. You want this stuff or don't you? The cashier scoffed. Phoebe tells the elderly couple. 4, 16, 19, 30, 32, and 40. Trust me, mister. Today is your lucky day. You know, I think I'll buy one of these lottery tickets, too. Phoebe takes a ticket and a pencil. She smiles at the couple. Back at the van, Piper was waiting for Phoebe to return. The door finally opens and Phoebe slips inside. Ready, let's go, Phoebe said. What are you smiling about? Piper asked her suspiciously as she came up. Oh, nothing, Phoebe lied casually. Piper reverses the van and drives away. The old woman standing at the end of the line turns around and watches them go. She lifts up her right hand and scratches her temple. On the back of her right hand is a tattoo of an angel. That night at a parked car there was a stakeout in progress. Open on Brittany Reynolds' photo. The tattoo is on the back of her right hand. Daryl hands the photo to Andy. He looks at it. The two men are sitting in a parked car outside Quake. What do you want me to say? Something just does not feel right to me about this. I can't help it, Andy stated. Oh, here we go again, he muttered, making himself comfortable. Andy ignored him and continued. I mean, where are they all right? What's this guy doing with these poor women? Andy asked aloud. Daryl smirked and glanced toward his partner. Thinking an alien abduction are you? Daryl joked, causing Andy to turn and glare at him. I'm serious, Morris, he countered, looking back out the window. Daryl frowned and shook his head. I know. That's what scares me. Let me guess. Favorite movie growing up? Ghostbusters. Am I right? Look, we got a crazy Trudeau. Likes the pretty ladies. That's it. The end. If he comes back looking for more, we're gonna grab him, tag him, make the world a safer place. That too hard to follow. Single quote. Evil Dead 2. Andy suddenly replied and Daryl looked back at him in confusion. Andy grinned and explained. Favorite movie growing up? Just for the record. Daryl smiled and Andy looked back out his window to catch sight of Prue getting out of her car and entering the restaurant. The bank across the street. I think we should grab the ATM tapes and see if. Daryl trailed off as he heard the door of the car open as Andy got out of the car. Whoa, where are you going? He asked. Andy pointed silently and Daryl began to shake his head. No, forget it, Romeo. You're not blowing our cover. Come on, Morris, cut me some slack. I have to talk to her, he pleaded, glancing back behind him to where Prue had just disappeared. Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I need, he added. Daryl rolled his eyes, but pointed at his watch silently, saying he was keeping time. Andy grinned and set the timer on his watch. At that same time at Quake, Piper was working like always while Prue was carefully traversing through the crowded restaurant looking for Piper. She was about to head into the kitchen when Piper came running out, ordering several workers to different duties. Come on, Cindy, your salmon's up. Hector, way behind. We need clean plates, Piper frantically called before Prue reached out and grabbed Piper's hands, forcing her to look at her. You didn't give Andy my cell phone number by any chance, did you? Prue asked, causing Piper to give her a confused look. No, why? Piper replied, looking around at the restaurant in frustration. Prue shook her head and followed Piper as she walked toward the cash register. Remind me, I wanted to do this for a living, she muttered. Looks like you're the only one of us who's going to be doing anything for a living. I think I blew my interview, Prue admitted, sighing. Piper flashed a semi-annoyed look. I can't imagine it was less than stellar, Piper countered. She was suddenly pulled to a stop as Prue halted, staring at Phoebe in aggravation. What's Phoebe doing here? Prue demanded, glaring at her little sister. Flirting, Piper answered shortly. Yeah, and she's wearing Armani. Where did she get that? Prue snapped, glancing at Piper quickly. Not from my closet. Gotta go. Piper responded, pulling away from Prue and heading back into the kitchen. Prue watched her leave and approached her youngest sister. Prue, hi. Phoebe greeted before turning to Stefan. This is my other sister, Prue. This is Stefan the photographer. She introduced. Prue forced a fake smile and shook hands with him. Pleasure. Stefan replied. Likewise, Prue countered and her eyes flickered over Phoebe's dress. Nice dress. Prue brought up casually. Don't worry. It's not yours. Phoebe stated as she leaned back into her chair. I know. I could never afford it. Prue answered, forcing her tone of voice to stay positive. Phoebe frowned slightly and turned to Stefan. Will you excuse me for a minute? She asked pleasantly and got up from her chair. She irritably grabbed both Prue's hand and led her away. Stefan glances down at his hands and he's aging again. His hand is old, spotted and wrinkly, his fingernails brown with age. Phoebe walks into the kitchen. Prue was close behind her. What do you mean you charged it? How are you going to pay for that? You're broke, Prue scolded, her eyes flashing in anger. Phoebe spun around to face Prue defiantly. Not for long, she countered, glaring at her eldest sister. Prue sighed in understanding. You didn't use your powers again, Prue stated, shaking her head in frustration. Maybe. Are you saying you haven't? Phoebe shot back. No, I'm not saying that, but we're not talking about me, are we? Prue snapped, her voice beginning to rise. At this point, Piper came running up to them. Piper glanced around the kitchen trying to see if anyone had heard the conversation. What are you guys doing in here? She hissed, looking nervous. The same thing we do at home, Phoebe replied without turning to look at Piper. Prue ignored Piper and continued. So what did you do? Go to the tracks, play the market, what? She demanded. The lottery. Phoebe admitted, her eyes narrowed in defiance. Phoebe. Piper scolded loudly. What did you want me to do? Ignore the premonition. Not help a needy family. That's what we're supposed to do. Phoebe yelled. No, we're not supposed to use our powers for our own personal gain. That's what it says in the Book of Shadows. Prue countered. Not so loud, Piper pleaded, pacing around her sisters. You said we needed money, right? Well, I'm getting some. Phoebe pointed out. Come on, you guys. Piper pleaded some more, only to be ignored again. So get a job like everyone else. Prue yelled, all her frustration of the day being released. I'm using my mind instead. Phoebe retorted. At that moment the door to the kitchen once again opened as Andy pushed through looking for Prue. Prue, he called, his eyes focusing on her. Prue froze, hoping she had heard wrong, while Phoebe and Piper watched him approach nervously. As he walked toward her he bumped into a worker carrying plates, causing him to fall and drop the plates. Watch it, Piper shouted, throwing her hands out. The plates froze just before hitting the ground, as did everything else in the room. All three sisters were left staring wide-eyed at the situation. Oh no, not again, Piper muttered, beginning to pace frantically. Now look what you have done. Prue shouted, waving her hand to emphasize the situation. This is my fault. Phoebe yelled in disbelief. Piper looked up at them in surprise. You guys aren't frozen? She asked in confusion. I guess it doesn't work on witches. Phoebe suggested with a shrug. Prue sees everyone in the main dining room as unfrozen. How long are these people going to stay frozen? I don't know, not long. Piper answered, trying to take deep breaths to calm herself. It doesn't work out here, either. Single quote. Oh, tell me this isn't happening. Elsewhere, Naruto had decided to follow Piper, seeing as she was the one who had the most doubts. He watched as Piper and Phoebe have a heartfelt talk. You don't understand. You don't think we are. You're never afraid of anything. I envy that about you. Always have. Yeah, well, don't, because it gets me into trouble sometimes. Piper, talk to me. I don't know. It's just, our whole lives we've been like everybody else. Rushing off to work, going out on bad dates, and buying shoes. Then suddenly we wake up one day, and everything is different. We're witches now. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Single quote. Are you kidding? It's a great thing. Single quote, single quote. You don't know that. We don't know anything about these powers. Why we have them, what they mean, where they even come from. I mean, how do we know it's not? How do we know it's not from evil? Piper, we've been through this. We're good witches. Single quote, single quote. How do we know? What about Jeremy? What about all the other warlocks he said would be coming after us? How do we know we're not just like them? That is what scares me. We don't know. I just want to be normal again, as messed up as that was. Is that too much to ask for? Single quote, single quote. Piper, listen to me. You, daughter, the sweetest, most caring person I have ever met. No, I mean that. You are. You're always there to help anybody, even strangers. You've been doing it your whole life. So there's no way that you've been given this gift, if it wasn't to do good things with it. To protect the innocent, just like the Book of Shadows says. Besides, if anyone should be concerned with being bad, it's me, right? She laughs. You've got nothing to be afraid of. I gotta run. I am going to get my picture taken. She stands up and poses. Piper laughs. Phoebe whirls around and leaves the attic. Naruto promptly left as he went to his house. He got a ring on the phone. Hello there, Hannah, any news? He asked as the woman told him her suspicions of Prue being a witch. About how she used her power to deflect paint. Keep your eyes posted and your ears open, he said as he decided to watch the Charmed Ones vanquish his crony. The first things the sister did upon arriving home were to walk over to the Book of Shadows. Piper, what were you talking about? Piper starts flipping through the pages. I'm telling you, I saw something about it in the Book of Shadows. Okay, look, see, the middle sister said, reading through it. She ran into one of the demon's victims. She may have been senile, but she knew things only Brittany Reynolds knew. She also had the tattoo on her hand, which was rare for anyone inside the States. Javna feeds 1 week out of every year, stealing the life force from the young. She read quickly. By invoking a black magic power that will allow the caster to gain eternal youth. Piper declared, pointing at the page again. Prue reread the passage and nodded. It's gotta be what happened to Brittany. Single quote, single quote. There must be some kind of incantation to reverse it somehow. She flips to another page in the book. There is. The Hand of Fatima. It says that the Prophet Muhammad invoked it centuries ago to banish Javna back to wherever the hell he came from. Single quote, single quote. Yeah, well, the problem is, we don't know who Javna really is, let alone where he is. Brittany is walking downstairs in the kitchen and looking around. She sees the address on the napkin hanging on the refrigerator. She removes it and stares at it, trying to recall something. She gasps and collapses. From up in the attic, they hear a thud. Brittany, Piper called worriedly before dashing off down the stairs, closely followed by Prue. They turn into the kitchen and find old Brittany sitting on the floor. Oh, my God, what happened? Piper frantically asked. Brittany, are you all right? Should I call 911? Prue suggested. And tell them what? That she's dying of old age at 25. Piper picks up the napkin. What is it? It's a cocktail napkin from my restaurant, with Stefan's address on the back, Piper explained, sounding confused. Brittany weakly put her finger on the address. Javna, she whispered, her eyes wide with fright. Both sisters fell silent and cast fearful glances at each other. Prue, that's where Phoebe went. Piper finally choked out. Phoebe vainly tried to break the bonds that held her tied to the table all the previous victims had been on. Please, Stefan, or whoever you are, let me go. Phoebe pleaded just as Javna steps into the light and she sees how old and wrinkly he is. It's Javna, he hissed slowly. His eyes began to glow red and Phoebe screamed. Outside, Prue drove up to the studio building and parks just behind the van. They get out of the car and check the van. Do you see anything? Prue called as she turned the car off. No, Piper whispered, beginning to panic. It's okay, Piper, we'll find her. Prue insisted. Maybe we should call the police. Piper suggested, giving Prue a worried glance. Prue shook her head. No, if Javna has her, we're the only ones who can stop him. She berated gently. But we need Phoebe to do it. The incantation only works with the three of us, she said as they hear Phoebe scream. They head for the building. Jovna's eyes glow red. Light beams from Jovna's eyes shoot out and hit Phoebe in her eyes. The door opens and Piper and Prue steps inside the building. Jovna stops shooting beams at Phoebe, turns and looks at Prue. She squints her eyes and sends Jovna flying against the opposite wall. He falls to the floor with a thud. Piper hurries to the table to free Phoebe. Piper. Jovna gets to his feet, turns and aims his eyes at Prue. They glow and beams shoot out and connect with Prue's eyes. He makes his way to her and she glides over the floor toward him. We need you. We don't have a lot of time, okay? She said, freeing Phoebe. Phoebe scrambles off the table. Meanwhile, Prue is being pulled toward Jovna. Prue, grab the mirror. Phoebe yelled to Prue, reaches out and grabs the mirror off the table. She uses its reflection to deflect Jovna's eye beams. It shoots back at him and he screams in pain. He falls back against the table, then shoots the eye beams at Prue again. This time she's ready for him. It deflects off the mirror back at him, temporarily blinding him. Piper and Phoebe flank Prue, who takes out the spell. All right, now, all three sisters began to chant. Evil eyes, look unto thee, may they soon extinguished be. Bend thy will to the power of three, eye of earth, evil and accursed. Single quote. Prue hands the mirror to Piper to hold. You can't stop me. I will live forever. No. Jovna yells as Prue holds out her hand and it glows into the hand of Fatima. A thick, white beam of light shines out from the center of her palm and hits Jovna square in his chest. Evil eyes, look unto thee, may they soon extinguished be. Bend thy will to the power of three, eye of earth, evil and accursed. Single quote. No. He screams and falls back onto the table. He stops struggling and his body ages. It explodes, leaving a skeleton behind. The beam continues to shine out from Prue's hand. It washes over the skeleton till it turns to dust. The beam of light stops. The wind blows the dust away. The sisters watch and soon there is nothing left. Back at the manor, Brittany is leaning tiredly back against the couch. She morphs back to her young self. She sits up and looks at herself. As the sisters left the building, the sounds of police sirens filled the air as the cars got closer. There was no way they could be able to pull a disappearing act, so the sisters huddled next to the two cars as the squad cars parked in the parking lot. Several officers, including Andy and Daryl, jumped out of their vehicles and began to surround the studio. What the hell? Daryl asked, noticing the three sisters. Prue, Andy called in surprise as he ran toward them, followed closely by Daryl. What are you doing here? He demanded while Daryl began to order some other officers to their duties. Prue forced herself not to bite her lip or look at her sisters. Well, we were just trying to get the van started. She lied, pointing towards the Quake van that Phoebe had arrived in. Piper jumped to back up the lie. Yeah, Phoebe called and said she was having car trouble, Piper added casually, pointing back toward Phoebe. Stefan was going to take some pictures of me, Phoebe explained to Andy's questioning look. Do you guys have any idea how lucky you are? This guy is the stalker, he informed them as the three glanced at each other and feigned their characteristic looks in such a situation. Prue looked worried, Piper leaned into Prue looking scared, and Phoebe looked surprised. Daryl came up behind Andy and got his attention. There's no sign of him inside, but his car is here, so he might still be around. He explained and then glanced at the three sisters. Stay with them, he ordered and walked off. Andy watched Daryl leave and then looked back at the van. Excuse me, Andy stated as he gently pushed Phoebe and Piper farther away from the door to the van. He reached through the open window and turned the keys in the ignition. The van roared to life and Andy glanced back at them with a knowing look. Hey, how about that? You fixed it. Piper offered, acting impressed only to receive a sarcastic grin from Andy. Maybe we should go, Phoebe suggested. Good idea, Andy agreed and walked to stand questioningly in front of Prue. Piper glanced between the two and hurried off after Phoebe to wait in the car. Thanks, Prue whispered, smiling awkwardly, her eyes flickering to the van and back to Andy, who gave her a slight nod. Call me, she asked hopefully. Sure, Andy replied. Prue gave a slight nod in return and walked around Andy to join her sisters in the car. Andy turned to watch her leave before turning to find Daryl. That night at the manor, the Charmed ones were exhausted mentally and physically from their ordeal, hoping to get home and rest, but of course things are never that easy. They walked in the door and turned on the lights, and sure enough the same figure from the other day was there. I see Javna has failed, he said, flipping a page in one of the girls' photo albums. A simple-minded creature with simple desires. I wouldn't suggest attacking me. I doubt you three will tickle me, let alone be able to vanquish me, the figure said, squashing any plans of resistance. Tempest. The hot temper hiss escaped Prue's lips. What do you want with me and my sisters? What I want? It's not what I want, but what the inhabitants of the underworld fear. Fear? Why would they fear us? You're the Charmed ones. Quite simply, you're destined to become the most powerful witches that have ever lived. Warlocks and demons fear you not only because of the power but your potential to be a powerful symbol for good. The one invincible force of good capable of vanquishing them, especially those who have history with the War and Hallowell line. Then what about you? Are you here seeking vengeance, or is it because you want out powers? Piper questioned as the figure chuckled and shook his head. He then closed the photo album and placed it on the table. I can teleport, control the elements, and shape-shift, he listed off. I have no need for your abilities. If I were you girls, I practice and master your powers as soon as you can. Just know I'll have my eye on the three of you. Word of advice, through the eyes you can find the source. Sayonara, the figure said as he disappeared into a puff of smoke. Great. And just when things couldn't get any more complicated, Phoebe said as the girls decided to turn in and wonder what to do about the visitor tomorrow.